So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the 6th part of the story, What If Naruto Chose the Path of a Conqueror. If you guys enjoy this what if and want more, comment down below to let me know. The comments on videos really help me out a lot. They motivate me to upload more frequently, so please do comment down below. Before I start, please do support for more awesome contents and leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And share this video with your friends and also check out the descriptions and check out the playlists. With that out of the way, let's start. You are a strange old woman. Kakashi crouched on the railing, ignoring the rolling waves of sand beneath him. He focused on his opponent, Anko crouching down in front of him, her hands reaching behind her for a number of senbon, even as several large snakes slithered down from her sleeves. You shouldn't be so active at your age. You are just as annoying as I thought you would be. Chiyo pulled back, all 10 of her puppets drawing back to surround her in a semicircle. She was cautious, it was obvious from the way she refused to give Kakashi a direct line of sight with her. She hid it well, but she was afraid of the lazy Jonin. He was one of the most dangerous shinobi in the elemental nations after all. It was almost a miracle she had lasted as long as she had against him, his clones, and that strange hound technique he used. She was lucky he had let her have the numerical advantage again, dismissing his clones not long after joining the fight and reaching the sudden but needed lull. Now all she was worried about was what he would do now. Her puppets are good. As Kakashi silently sat across from one of the honored siblings, he sorted through the multitude of memories his cage bunshin had given him once he had dispelled them. That Chikamatsu guy must have been truly incredible to make things this dangerous. The copy nin glanced down to the scratch on the metal plate on the top of his hand. He considered it a souvenir of the battle. I can die really easy if I'm not careful enough with her and her little tricks. His mind was running through information at speeds all but a handful of Nara clan members could handle. He was focusing on his opponent, watching her for the slightest twitch to launch an attack, as he did such a thing. She must have been practicing with those things to be ready for this invasion. Her puppet brigade is probably waiting to attack later. Kakashi, unseen by Chiyo or anyone really, opened his covered eye and used the sharingan to see something very concerning. That little seal she put down is making me nervous. The moment that sand clears, something bad is going to come from it. I already know. But what is it? Is it more reinforcements from Sunagakure to the heart of the village? Have they really mastered Fuinjutsu that much like we feared? If they did, why is their Jinchuriki so unstable? Is it some powerful summon we don't know about? Is it something else to draw even more of our forces away like with the Ichibi? Most of the Anbu are still holding themselves back even now, waiting for that beast to show itself and take it someplace else with the best the village can do without the fourth around. The masked shinobi withheld the urge to sigh as he closed his concealed eye once again. I need to finish this before the Ichibi starts its rampage here. He would be there this time. He would make sure he would be there. Time to take things seriously it looks like. Kakashi tensed. Chiyo sent the dual sword-wielding puppet forward with a twitch of her finger. A single kunai wreathed in lightning chakra was all he needed to counter the two swords and cut them down, 3/4 of each weapon flying through the air as Anko threw a barrage of senbon into the puppet, locking up its joints with her scary level of precision. It was almost funny how similar each of the puppets were to actual living and breathing humans. The same anatomy models Anko had memorized to perform her job so well helped her battle the humanoid puppets in front of her now. Kakashi darted forward, past the immobilized puppet as he raced through a set of hand seals only he knew. He ended the sequence by lowering his hand, grabbing hold of his wrist with his opposite hand and sending the necessary chakra to his hand. Is that? Chiyo's eyes widened at the blinding light that emerged from the hand of the Jonin. She pulled back, more than one puppet coming before her to block the attack, with a shield of chakra emerging from its arms via hidden mechanisms, only now exposing themselves. He's going to use something like that already? He's serious. Anko looked at the technique with almost awe. She was amazed that Kakashi would take such lengths to end his opponent. It was almost hard to believe the copy nin was so motivated to unleash not only a technique as powerful as the one he was making use of, but also the fact that it was one of his original technique too. The technique said to have split a bolt of lightning in half and Kakashi's Haddock's only original technique. The copy nin vanished from sight, Chiyo's eyes widening as her defenses were rendered worthless and Anko couldn't help the smile crossing her face. That old lady is done for. Anko ran chakra through the senbon in both of her hands and threw them forward, piercing through the chakra shields Chiyo had placed between herself and Kakashi and once again locking the puppets into place. The fact she had severed the chakra strings as well only helped seal Chiyo's face. Berkiri. Kakashi was behind her, the honored sibling attempting to leap away, but it was hopeless. She had hardly begun to react when the raw electricity originating from within the assassination technique had already locked her body in place. Shakutan. Kajusatsu. The copy nin narrowly pulled back in time, avoiding the white and red sphere of pure heat. Of course someone like her would be here. Kakashi drew back from the honored sibling, avoiding the attack that he knew would have claimed his life. Sakura of the Scorch Release. Kakashi looked towards where a somewhat familiar kunoichi stood above him. Her two-toned hair and pupil-less brown eyes would reveal her identity to anyone who had lived through the war she had joined so young, just like so many others. The same war she had helped tip towards the stalemate that would eventually end it. I didn't expect to see you here, Sakura. Kakashi stood as casually as one could with a technique like his lightning cutter filling one of his hands. Sakura looked at him for a moment with an unreadable expression before a dark smile stretched across her face. I'm not that surprised to see you here, Kakashi. Sakura rose from the crouch she had arrived to the battle between the two Konoha shinobi and the honored sibling of Sungakure-in. Her eyes didn't leave Kakashi, and his eyes didn't leave when their respective allies joined them. Kakashi, what's the plan with these two? Anko didn't look to Kakashi as she asked her question, careful to keep her eyes on the elderly kunoichi they fought together. The interruption of someone as renowned as Sakura brought a slight worry from her, but she fought down any panic. She couldn't panic and expect to survive. The simple fact that she would die if she couldn't focus on her opponent, something which panic would greatly impede, allowed her to keep herself more than calm enough to keep a clear head. I thought we could ask them to leave the village, very nicely. Kakashi's reply made Sakura laugh. And here I thought the same, if I asked you nicely enough you would defect from Konoha and join Suna in destroying this village. Sakura's smile didn't leave her face as Kakashi shrugged his shoulder. You would have had to ask before all of this. Kakashi used the hand not holding his technique at the ready to gesture around him. His single visible eye turned cold. I would have actually considered killing you quickly then. Now I'm going to have to take my time with it. Your sense of humor is a bit dry, Kakashi. Sakura was still for only a moment longer before she was suddenly a blur of motion. Away from the two, a sleeping civilian tumbled over to his side. She was behind him, a kunai prepared to slit his throat before he could react. The copy nin ducked under the slash and turned with his lightning cutter, aimed to slice her in half with its power. Sakura avoided death, powering herself out of the way with her hands planted on his extended arm. She lifted one hand off his arm, aimed to slice his throat once more, and failed when he thrust forward with his lightning cutter. It ripped through her chest, and her shock was plain for the two observers to see. The civilian struck the ground on his side. Sakura shimmered back into view behind Kakashi, and a blazing hot orb ripped through his unprotected back. The lightning release clone, spawned from the Rikiri, erupted into an electrical storm at the attack. The real Kakashi and Sakura truly clashed. Kakashi caught her fist with one hand as she did the same with his own blow. The civilian's head struck the ground and his body settled in its new position. You're just as good as I remember, aren't you, Kakashi? Sakura didn't draw back and neither did Kakashi. Her smile at the challenge he was to her showed a hint of madness. You really do deserve that legend you've made for yourself, it looks like. I wouldn't say that. Kakashi gave her an eye smile. I'm too modest to call myself legendary. Both pulled away. Both began the clash again with a pair of kunai in each of their hands, their exchange so fast and deadly, neither of the two observers could manage to catch more than the moving colored streaks the two had become as they fought. This fight is insane. Anko turned her attention to Chiyo, readying a number of senbon between her fingers once more. I'm no help there, but I can end this old lady before she can activate that seal she planted. Her course decided, Anko launched herself forward just as Chiyo decided on the same course of action. She was met by a fresh puppet from the honored sibling, designed with melee in mind by its large and durable limbs, ripping the stone apart when it missed a descending overhead heel kick. Anko didn't attempt to clash with the puppet Chiyo had unleashed with one hand, the other focused on finding the multitude of senbon she had planted in the famed Chikamatsu collection to disable them with chakra threads from her other hand and pull them out. The kunoichi focused on evasion of each of its strike, throwing both arms forward once she was sure it would take a moment to recover after a failed grab left both its fists embedded in the ground. Snake surged forward from her sleeves and aimed to crush the puppet, only to be cut in half. A second puppet released by Chiyo, this one wielded a pair of slender blades, had joined the first and rescued it from its assured destruction. This is going to take longer than I thought. Anko let the dead snakes fall from her sleeves and drew a kunai to each hand. She threw herself towards the puppets at the same time they attacked her. Her kunai clashed with the twin blades of the new puppet while she twisted her body to the side to avoid the kick of the first puppet. She broke away through one kunai towards the puppet that had just tried to break her bones, and it was knocked aside by the blade-wielding puppet. A lot longer. She landed with a fair amount of distance between the two and drew a new kunai to her hand. She darted forward once more and the puppets moved to intercept her. Yugao lost her composure in the brief moment when her blade clashed with the shinobi she knew had nearly killed Hade. A wind chakra enhanced kunai kept him alive, kept him from losing his head to the blade of the angry cat masked Anbu in front of him. I will kill you. She broke away from the blade lock and regained control of herself, created a shadow clone on either side of herself, and launched herself and her clones forward as chakra ripped down each of their blades. Baki looked at her, looked at the clones that wielded deadly sharp blades, and didn't waste time. He raised two of his fingers into the air, unleashed his wind chakra as countless blades around him. It was his most versatile attack, one of his deadliest with the lives it had taken with ease, and he was sure it would do the same now. That's not going to work. The voice came from behind him, he narrowly avoided the blade swung for his head, lucky that it only left a small cut on the side of his neck. He threw a kunai towards the source of the voice, and it was deflected like he figured it would. He took in a deep breath then, using the residual wind chakra from his blade of wind, and breathed out 4 spiraling bullets of air. The Anbu's eyes tracked them behind her mask, she avoided them with ease, and charged towards him, just as his original attack at last struck her clones. He moved to avoid the rapid sword swings, backpedaling until he reached the edge of the rooftop. The battle quickly shifted from horizontal to vertical as he seamlessly stepped down the side of the building, applied chakra to his feet to remain there, and used a pair of kunai to counter the furiously blows of the Anbu, determined to kill him. She pressed her attack, her sword moving at speeds he would normally be impressed at if he wasn't currently on such an important mission. Tamari, keeping her brother up with his arm thrown over her shoulder, was still frozen in shock from the sudden attack. He needed to move the two away from the village, get them to the rendezvous point, and make sure they get far away from the village that would soon be victim to the rampaging Ichibi. Damn this Anbu. Baki stepped onto the street, throwing both short knives forward in an attempt to kill her. She bisected both with her chakra-enhanced blade. He moved to leap back up to the building and unleash his blade of wind once more in the middle of the air when she countered. Her trio of shadow clones had survived the attack against them and jumped down to kill Baki with their blades. One came straight down, the two others came racing down the building on either side, sweeping in to cut him down from the side. Yugao was fine to strike upward from below. I can't die yet. He unleashed his blade of wind more like a hammer, striking Yugao down directly as the force of unleashing his technique threw him up at an angle. He avoided the deadly blade from the descending Yugao, threw a trio of shuriken to hopefully dispel the clone, and a fresh pair of kunai allowed him to block the sweeping slashes from the two shadow clones coming from his side. He threw himself up using the blade lock, turning in midair to direct his attack as he once more raised two fingers. Yugao saw such a thing and immediately dashed into the interior of the building they had fought down. His blade of wind lacerated her clones and dispelled them. He didn't waste his time or his opportunity, landing on the side of the building and sprinting up it after turning around in the blink of an eye. He charged across the rooftop and to the two children of the Kazekage. Damn the Sanbu. He hurried to grab them both and just blitzed past everything else in their way. Escorting children from the battlefield was not very conductive to fighting an enemy the caliber of Konohagakure's near-legendary Anbu. He needed them out of harm's way as soon as possible. He could kill the Anbu afterwards. Her blade cut through the roof in front of him, stabbed through his foot, and he collapsed at the sudden pain. He attempted to rise on his hands and launch himself forward when the Anbu cut through the roof once more, delivering a large cut to his front. He collapsed, blood quickly spreading from the wound. The Anbu cut her entrance to the roof, approached him with deliberate slowness. He heard her blade cut through the air as she reversed her grip on it and let it hover above his head. He could hear the chakra she ran across it, almost feel it as it gathered at the tip. She was no doubt memorizing the moment she had created, her defeated opponent soon to be nothing but a corpse with her blade driven through his skull. His fingers twitched. Her blade descended. Baki. The wall of wind slammed into the Anbu, threw her away from him and nearly off the rooftop. Tamari was fast, not wasting time with staring down the Anbu, faced the killing intent exploding from her like the waves of the sea in a vicious storm, and grabbed Baki. She was still too slow. The Anbu's blade lunged through her shoulder as the shinobi pushed her away, saving her from having the blade punch through her chest. The Anbu withdrew the blade, no doubt recognizing the girl she had nearly killed, and he knew she was already changing her mission. She would capture the two valuable hostages in front of her for the Hokage, force the Kazekage to end the invasion at the risk of their execution. His fingers twitched. Her armored back was struck by a single near-invisible blade of wind. The Anbu ignored the pain, focused on turning to him and plunging her bloodied blade into his back above all else now. The Senbon was narrowly avoided, the Anbu withholding the desire to curse as the brother held the head of his puppet in shaking arms. She had avoided the poisoned weapon with ease, and now she focused a burst of killing intent on him, the puppet head clattering to the ground a second later. His sister swung her fan once more while she was momentarily distracted. An effective use of the shunsen let her avoid the side-like blade of wind. She darted towards the daughter of the Kazekage then, her sword held at her side. The large iron fan was swung down, turned into a club in a maneuver born more from desperation than anything else. The Anbu didn't humor her. She struck her in the stomach with the hilt of her blade, a palm strike from her free hand, throwing the fan free of her grip, and the girl collapsed. She was dry heaving after the air had been knocked out of her. The Anbu grabbed her by the back of her top and returned her blade to its place on her back. The pair of bolas was sent spinning through the air, wrapping around the dark-haired boy's legs and binding his arms to his side. The impact of the restraining equipment made him topple off the rooftop, but a pair of kunai to the chains of the bola pinned him to the building next to them. The Anbu finally turned to the Sunagakure shinobi bleeding at her feet. His fingers twitched. She broke them with a stomp from her sandal-clad foot. His technique died before it could be put to use from the pain breaking his concentration. The cat-mask Anbu towering above his prone form silently rose her hands up to her throat, drew her thumb across it in a silent promise, and pulled her foot back. Darkness greeted Baki when she swung it into his face, knocking him out in a pool of his own blood and the growing weight of his failure. Damn that Anbu. It was his last thought. This can't be it. Jiraiya sat down on the wall as he voiced his thoughts out loud, the titanic summon gone with a cloud of smoke once his clones, and he had finished it off. A few snakes to each of the gates. No one as smart as the Kazukiage would think to invade without knowing the shinobi Konoha had close by enough to assist. I could have guarded all 4 gates by myself if I wanted, summoning those 3 was to force these bastards to split up their forces to take them down. All of those snakes make this reek of my old teammate, so that means my suspicions about Itagakure are right. He's the guy in charge of that place. That also means he's going to be here somewhere, he's hiding and waiting to strike like the snake he is. Places. The voice below him was his only warning. He dodged a mass of hissing snakes that aimed to kill him, he threw himself into the air and unleashed a gout of flames without hand seals. A bullet of water of course countered it as he landed back on the wall, already rushing down it and falling onto all 4s as his hair grew much larger. Harija Goku. He unleashed his fearsome needle hell technique and observed the sudden smile on the pale face of his opponent. A fire surged from his feet, winds whipped around him as a gale, and stone rose to be his shield. All done by a single hand seal from the shinobi in front of him, 3 different nature transformations used at once. And that was even if the way he curled his fingers could even be considered a hand seal to begin with. Always got to correct me, huh? Jiraiya rose back to his full height on the vertical surface. I can never stand fools. Before him stood his former teammate, another member of the Sannin, a former Konoha nin, and now one of the most fearsome missing nin in the entire world. I suppose you never change even with all this time, Orochimaru. Orochimaru, the snake Sannin, merely smiled. It was a twisted thing, one that promised only death if one was lucky. If they were unlucky then death would be the greatest gift to them. Neither have you, Jiraiya. The 2 silently stared at one another, neither showing anything beyond indifference on their faces. A drop of water fell from a tree branch. A stone beneath both their feet shattered, the shockwave of their blows colliding with the other, producing more than enough force to do so. The drop of water fell to the ground. The chakra Jiraiya and Orochimaru unleashed as they battled washed over the village, alerted everyone present to the fact that the Sannin had at last met and begun to battle. The Kakashi didn't let his sole original technique die. A number of lines of lightning actually moved away from it and out around him, forming a number of electric hounds that paced around him and Anko. The Takubetsu Jonin knew when to follow the Jonin's lead, and she did so, her senbon remaining secured away for now as she raced through a number of hand seals at speeds befitting a woman trained by a Sannin. The trio of Anko soon crouched down in front of Kakashi and each raised their hands to their lips after racing through different seals. A slicing wave of water fired through the middle of the air as Anko swung her head from one side to the other. The barrage of air bullets soared forward above the wave of water, interspaced and staggered enough to make dodging them all difficult. The ground beneath their feet twisted and morphed into a tangled carpet of stone serpents that bolted across the ground towards her targets. Sakura. Chiyo retreated, her puppets vanishing in a burst of smoke marking their return to her scrolls. The Kunoichi silently appeared in front of the veteran shinobi and threw her hands in front of her, 2 white spheres with a light red aura of blazing heat appearing in front of her palms. She turned her hands inward and joined them together. The 2 spheres fused and expanded into a shield against the attacks before Sakura thrust her hands forward, sending it towards the 2 shinobi. Damn it. Anko cursed, her attacks failing as the water turned to mist, the stone broke under the heat and the air only seemed to increase the power of Sakura's attack. She burned through the needed hand seals for her next technique with her clones mirroring her. Stand B. Kakashi's hound survived the attack. Lightning crackled off of several of them before it erupted outward as a devastating electric blast. The hounds that had been the center of each blast changed from lightning to water and howled, unleashing torrents of water from their jaws. Sakura's incoming attack shattered into a multitude of blazing spheres as she clenched her hands into fists, each sphere shooting through the hounds in an attempt to destroy them entirely. It failed. Another electric blast erupted from a hound and it suddenly became stone. It howled and dug its stone claws into the ground as jagged stones ripped through the air from its jaws. Sakura noticed the smaller spheres coming together into a single large sphere as she threw her hands out to her sides, splaying her fingers. 2 more spheres formed from her palms and threw themselves forward and towards Kakashi's hounds. 2 more electrical blasts erupted from the hounds as they shifted to a new element, more hounds of water suddenly present and unleashing a fresh torrent on Sakura's blazing hot spheres, made of her famed scorch release. So this is what a battle between 2 geniuses looks like? Anko could only look in with mute shock. The way that neither Sakura or Kakashi seemed surprised by the acts of the other, the way they countered each other seamlessly, and the sheer amount of chakra both could produce somewhat terrified her. It was almost impossible to believe only 2 were fighting. I guess I'll go kill the old lady. Anko searched for Chiyo, spotted her behind Sakura as she unrolled a fresh scroll, and the Takebetsu Jonin grinned. She rose her hands up to her mouth and bit down on both of her thumbs as the 2 clones on either side of her rushed around either side of the clash between Sakura and Kakashi. Smoke shrouded her hands as she struck both against the ground before she dashed to the side before sprinting towards the older kunoichi. A kunai slid down from her sleeves and into each of her hands, and she threw both forward, the trio of explosive tags trailing behind, both easily spotted by her experienced target. She couldn't do much to stop her attack from striking. Her clones attacked with a pair of jagged blades made from stone, replacing most of their lower arms and hands. The elderly kunoichi wasn't able to stop the 4 blades and her sudden attack all at once. Anko had planned it as such after all. Time to die. She couldn't help the smile on her face as she prepared the hand seal to detonate the explosive tags. She didn't expect an expertly wielded blade to sever each blade from her clones, a great gale to knock aside her projectiles, and to have to avoid a pair of blade-wielding puppets from cutting her down from behind by ducking low to the ground. It's such a shame I have to rescue you, sister. Anko cursed when her eyes took in the sight of Ibizo, the second half of Sungakure's honored siblings, standing in front of Chiyo with an aged katana in his hands. She couldn't help the fear she felt at her odds, the 2 shinobi in front of her renowned for their dangerous teamwork on the battlefield. They were legendary, few able to claim to have survived an encounter with both of them. Even fewer could claim actually beating the 2. The 4th Hokage was among such a small list, the early period of the 3rd Shinobi World War, a chaotic time where he emerged victorious against both shinobi. As if I didn't have it handled. Chiyo twitched her finger, the 2 puppets that had attacked Anko drawing themselves back to her, a glance to their hands, revealed that each finger had been replaced with long, slender, and no doubt poison-coated blades. More blades jutted from the bodies of the puppets, no doubt the puppets could become deadly saws that would cut her to shreds. That brat didn't stand a chance of killing me. I'm going to kill you. Anko narrowed her eyes at the 2, cautious for any movement from Chiyo as she readied her chakra to attack her, now, 2 opponents. But I do not like my odds. Odds were not in her favor at all. She withheld the urge to sigh or glance behind her to see if Kakashi could lend any support to her. She figured he was busy dealing with a renowned kunoichi like Sakura. She couldn't rely on him to help her anyway. Her hands shifted to her side, her fingers wrapping around the hilt of the blade she had taken from Sasuke before his 2nd round match with Temari. This isn't going to be easy. Anko took a single short breath before she darted forward. Her acquired blade immediately clashed with Ibizo's single katana, Anko, catching sight of the seals that wrapped around it just in time to avoid the several kunai that erupted out of them. She dodged the poisoned weapons and replied with a trio of senbon the elderly shinobi avoided with ease that surprised her. She pushed herself to press the attack when the 2 puppets she hadn't forgotten about attacked her, the clicking and clacking of their movements, the only tell Anko had to avoid them. She ripped through the needed hand seals to unleash the fire release technique when Ibizo pressed forward with his attack instead. She narrowly avoided a trio of slicing blades of air before she was forced to dodge a dozen shuriken and kunai released from hidden seals on the puppets she had been attacked by. Even then the attack was joined by Ibizo swinging his blade through the air, sending a trio of crescents of wind towards her once more. She avoided them by dropping into the ground before erupting outward and breathing out a stream of fire. Ibizo looked at it with almost contempt before his sword was a whirlwind around him. He cut a pocket into her attack, one he leaped through and towards her. Wind chakra ripped free of his form in a burst, causing her to curse as she was thrown back and through the air before she could even land on her own 2 feet from her emergence from the ground. Ibizo knew she was open to his next attack and so took a deep breath as he sent his sword spinning into the air. The puppet Chiyo had summoned snatched it out of the air and surged forward with it held directly in front of it. Anko drew a kunai to counter the old blade in the hands of the mechanical weapon, just as Ibizo unleashed a vortex from his mouth. She was trapped in it before she could counter, the puppet torn out of it by a deft tug from Chiyo, and the katana was handed back to Ibizo as the puppet was sealed away once again. Chiyo sent the two blade-covered puppets forward instead, and, just like Anko thought, they turned into deadly saws as chakra caused sections of their bodies to begin to spin faster and faster. What Anko didn't think would happen was the fact that the blades would grow longer, that more would appear from hidden seals, and even more seals unleashed a torrent of kunai and shuriken into the vortex. Each one of the weapons was covered in an abundance of poisons, and the sheer varieties Chiyo was known for obviously. There was enough that the vortex actually began to take on a purple tinge from the sheer amount that it had ripped free from the weapon as they entered it. Ibizo remained where he stood, a pair of small humanoid puppets perching on his shoulders and erecting a shield of chakra in front of him to keep him safe from any poisonous fallout. Anko was torn back and forth by the roaring vortex, her blood soon joining the poison as she found it was impossible to avoid the countless weapons within the vortex. She narrowly avoided the multiple passes of the bladed puppets. She avoided being torn to shreds, but she could already feel the dozens of poisons now burning through her veins, her body going through a multitude of reactions, and the pain ripping apart her mind. She couldn't help but scream as she slammed into the ground, more poisoned weapons cutting into her as the vortex ended. She tried to rise, but the two puppets crashed into her, their blades further tearing into her skin, and two actually impaling her through the stomach. "It looks like she's dead." Chiyo's voice came from far away. "Rasa-sen needs our help." Ibizo's voice came from close by. "That young man, always coming to us with his problems. This generation is so reliant on its elders. They were leaving her to die here. They knew she would die here. I remember a time when I could sleep all day. Those times are long gone, brother." No, she couldn't move, couldn't escape the growing pool of her own poisoned blood she had been left to lie in. She wanted to curse them, to kill them, but it was truly hopeless. She couldn't move, she knew she was going to die from the sheer number of her wounds, too many already severe enough to kill her on their own. All of them together sealed her fate, she would bleed to death in a minute at most. Chiyo's poisons only made sure of it. Not yet. Not without that bastard too. Her once teacher came to mind, filled her with rage despite her state. Her hands balled into bloody fists. "He needs to die before me, I have to stop him." Her eyes shut against her will, her rage could not keep them open. She couldn't keep herself alive with just her rage. But it did awaken something else. Anko Kakashi avoided Pakura's scorching hot spheres coming from seemingly everywhere, at least a dozen of them keeping his elemental hounds occupied and a dozen pressuring him. He tried to throw a kunai to kill her, but the dome she had used a handful of spheres to create melted the metal before it could even get close enough to harm her. The explosive tag was incinerated before it could detonate as well. The tag he attached to it activated through a storm of senbon, failing to pierce through her attack by attacking from multiple fronts. Her defense is automatic like the Jinchuriki's, it looks like. Kakashi dimly observed the fact. His single visible eye remained focused on Anko's dying form. "I need to get to Anko still, get her some." His thoughts were interrupted when he narrowly avoided a trio of scorch release spheres coming at him in a pincer movement. He avoided them and avoiding the two spheres arching down on him from above. Two hounds of water threw themselves into the way of another two coming from behind him. His lightning cutter-bearing hand lunged forward, a fresh pair of hounds of lightning darting forward and roaring, unleashing a stream of lightning bullets that tore through the scorch release spheres that tried to kill him. Pakura actually broke free of her sphere, running to the side to avoid the barrage. She formed the necessary hand signs and unleashed a gale of wind from her mouth that swiftly shifted into a number of widespread slicing crescents that dissipated Kakashi's lightning bullets as they tore through them. "I almost forgot she can use wind release." Kakashi almost wanted to curse himself as he dodged to the side, avoiding her attack and taking a short breath. He breathed out a stream of fire with a single hand sign, the flames quickly separating themselves into a number of fireballs. Quantity was his friend here. Pakura seemed to sneer at him before she breathed out a torrential stream of fire. She blinded herself because of her pride. Kakashi threw himself free of the ground beneath her, his lightning cutter plunging through her chest. The fire release clone erupted. It made the lightning release clone he made from his lightning cutter follow suit. The two shinobi clashed with kunai in the middle of the air, Kakashi not letting how impressed he was at Pakura's planning show in what was exposed of his face. The fact she then countered the shuriken he pulled back on a wire string tied to his finger with her own received nothing as well. He threw a trio of kunai forward, expertly hit a number of senbon in their shadows, and Pakura countered them with a large shuriken she no doubt summoned to her hand, threw, and then engaged his kunai in the blink of an eye. He had used the time she had taken to replace himself with a clone, of course, the clone using a smoke bomb moments later, and broke away from the talented Sunagaker Kunoichi. "She's good." She didn't even pretend that he was still in front of her, a sphere punching through the clone's chest and dispelling it. It was a normal shadow clone, and Pakura landed on the ground. She stared directly where he was hiding, and the copy nin revealed himself. "You're good." He admitted it out loud. He settled his hands in his pockets, took hold of a kunai in one hand as the other burned through one-handed hand seals he had developed in his free time since seeing them put to use by Zabuza's apprentice in waves. "Better than you?" The voice came from behind him. He turned to the side to avoid the white-hot sphere she unleashed on him and unleashed a stream of water from his covered mouth. He drew in a deeper breath, shifted the arrangement of his fingers, and spewed out a stream of water that created a heavy mist around the two. The Kura surged towards him through it, two spheres spiraling ahead of her to not only light her path through the mist, but also to keep Kakashi from striking at her from ahead. He was already off to the side of her, a pair of kunai launching towards her head. She ducked to dodge them, correctly guessing that there was a wire string tied between them via the rings. The Kura severed the string based on principle, with a shuriken sent racing through it before she made a finger gun towards Kakashi, and his eye actually widened at the sight of such a gesture. "Shakuten. John." An orb didn't leave her finger. A superheated beam nearly punched through Kakashi's head at the blinding speed it fired off at. He barely managed to avoid it, knowing exactly where it was coming, and was still in the process of dodging the first when Pakura channeled her scorch release chakra to her finger once more and smiled. "Shakuten. John." She fired a second beam and Kakashi vanished from sight, a log taking his place. He narrowly avoided it with a substitution technique and quickly he prepared himself to dodge again only for the Kunoichi to not press her attack. He seems to have remembered the last time we fought. The two prodigies had clashed more than once on the battlefield, their youth and inexperience the only reason either had remained alive past their first clash, and the sheer talent and power of both making sure neither could take the life of the other in their other clashes. He's expecting them now. The way Kakashi held himself appeared to be in his normal lackadaisical way, but her trained eyes saw how tense he was, how ready he was to avoid her attack. "I thought I had him beat with this. I guess I only have myself to blame for this fight not being over. I telegraphed that attack too much. I should have left a clone to keep him busy and kill him with it from behind." Despite how well the tactic would have worked, Pakura couldn't help the distaste she felt at it. She wanted to kill Kakashi Haddock at his best, the genius unable to counter her. Filling him with a surprise attack from behind while a clone kept him busy, while the most practical, would make her feel displeasure at her victory. She wanted him beaten by her power after all. If the best shinobi of Konoha of their generation fell to the best kunoichi of Sunagakure of the same generation, the prestige of Sunagakure would be clear for all to see. Not even Kakashi Haddock could compare to their greatest shinobi. He would expect such an attack anyway. His sharingan would let him see through any clone I make in the blink of an eye. "You still remember that technique, Kakashi?" Pakura didn't lower her hands. She channeled chakra for her next shot as she spoke to her foe. Kakashi and her both knew that she was only talking to keep him busy while she prepared her next shot. "After seeing how well you used it the first time? How could I ever forget a technique that powerful?" Kakashi was ready for her. He was preparing his own counter to her it seemed. "Shakuten. John." She had lowered the time between her shots through training. A fresh beam lanced through the air before he had fully prepared his counter. He spewed out a jet of water towards the ground, throwing himself into a quickly forming pillar of water. He moved through the necessary hand seals and took a deep breath. "I'm borrowing this from you, Izumo." "Suiten. Mizuum Nabara." He spewed out a stream of the sticky liquid, sweeping his head from side to spread it as much as he could. His genius showed as he followed behind the wide stream with small bullets of the sticky liquid, accurately predicting where Pakura would throw herself into the air to avoid the attack. As well as the multitude of scorch release clones she released at the same time. What the? The water wasn't evaporated as the scorch release clones flashed to red and white, they were encased in shells of the liquid. How isn't it turning to mist? Pakura avoided the bullet sent towards her before her danger senses screamed to her. She tilted her head forward and narrowly avoided the lethally sharp blade from the suddenly still mass of liquid behind her. The pillar of water Kakashi stood on quickly threw itself forward as a pack of hounds as he connected his hand to it. Pakura didn't waste her time with playing a game with Kakashi as she dodged them, she drew up her hand once more and gathered the needed chakra to it. "Shakuten. John." She once again unleashed her technique but swung the beam as she moved, making a deadly laser that turned the hounds of water to nothing but mist. Kakashi of course dropped into it, vanishing into the growing mist around her as she pointed her free hand palm down towards the sticky liquid below her. "Shakuten. Kajusatsu." A sphere of her fearsome scorch release fired down, spread out into a large disc to provide her a space to stand on without fear. It struck the syrup beneath her and was stopped. Again. Sakura released a second sphere with far more force than was really needed, throwing herself up into the air and avoiding a trio of spikes from the syrup once more. His control over such a technique is also rather impressive. I've never seen him apply constant shape transformation to a technique like this one before. It would make sense if his chakra leaned to a water nature, but I know he has a lightning nature. Has he prepared this technique for me? Has he mastered water nature chakra? How is he doing it? Kakashi landed on what remained on the pillar of water, a small jet that kept him above the syrup. Strands of water tied his hand to the water hounds as he plunged it into the top of the remaining water, and the water surged down the strands, the hounds each letting loose a howl as they bulged. They grew in size, doubling in size before they erupted forward, leaving droplets of water in their wake as they sprinted across the still surface of the syrup. How are you managing this, Kakashi? Sakura drew up her free hand, formed a second finger gun. Shakuten. John. Two beams lanced through the air as she crossed her arms over her chest, the beams lancing through the air behind her as well. Kakashi's hounds evaporated into nothing but mist, destroyed by the heat of her attack, and she drew her arms back around, crossing them over her chest and unleashing the beams towards the masked shinobi. She cut his water release clone into quarters with the X, her attack cut through its chest. It collapsed into water, the pillar of water broke down and revealed the second clone that had its arms severed from the syrup it had been manipulating. He used clones to manipulate the water and the syrup. Both were water release clones and manipulated them both as if they were a part of them. Sakura ended her technique, steam leaking from her fingers from the residual heat, and looked to the syrup that was quickly shrinking. He must be. You're too predictable. She threw herself onto Kakashi's arm, avoiding the lightning cutter he aimed to punch through her chest from behind. She pointed her free hand to him, her fingers taking on the shape of a finger gun once again, and his single visible eye widened. She can still fire. He tried to pull back, already knew he would be too slow to make it, and braced himself for the fatal attack. Her limit was 6 last time we fought. Shakuten. Guy, what the hell? She recoiled, pushing off of his arm and avoiding the leaping snake that emerged from his flak jacket. Kakashi's eye even widened at the sight of the deadly serpent that drew itself back into his collar. He hadn't sensed it just as much as Sakura had. Enko? Kakashi looked to the bleeding Takebetsu Jonin. He wouldn't hide or deny it, he was shocked at the level of skill she had. He had thought he had been aware of everything in the battle, forced to be to keep himself alive against a kunoichi as skilled as Sakura, but he was clearly wrong. The snake settled behind his collar and, even though he had just seen it, he didn't know it was there by his senses. Anko. Resolution entered his eye even as smoke drifted up from his collar, marking the disappearance of the snake. He needed to repay Anko for saving his life. He needed to save her life to make sure he could. I can't believe that snake was there the entire time. Sakura planted her hand on her hips, shaking her head from side to side in almost disappointment. I should have expected something like that from a girl trained by a Sannin, but even you look surprised. Anko's full of surprises like that. He desperately wished she would surprise him now, prove the bleeding form not too far away was nothing but a clone, a doll she had filled with fake blood, anything to show that she wasn't so close to death, so close to him. That she wouldn't be another death because he had failed. Again. I am too haddock. Sakura's smile spoke of dark intentions. You remember that technique, the one that turned our last battlefield into hell. She was taunting him, crossing her arms over her chest. You were so angry when I incinerated all of your friends. She knew she struck a chord when his hands balled into fists at his side. Let me reintroduce you to that hell. Sakura created a pair of scorch release clones without any movement that threw themselves towards a suddenly sprinting Kakashi by the time she finished speaking. The kunoichi rushed through the needed hand seals and dropped one hand to her side. Fires emerged from each of her fingertips on one hand before she made a fist. The fireball grew around her hand before she took a deep breath and drew her free hand up to her lips. She formed a tunnel with her fingers and blew out a stream of wind, fueling the flames in her hands to grow. Kakashi didn't waste his time with the scorch release clones, 2 water release clones pouring out from his hands and simply tackling their targets into an explosion of mist. He was focused solely on the kunoichi that aimed to turn the stadium, turn everyone inside it, into nothing but ash. The preparations complete for her technique, Sakura let her hand fall from her mouth and unleash a crescent made up of her scorch release with her free hand. It grew as it hurtled through the air as Sakura drew her hand up above her head and channeled more chakra to the inferno growing on her hand. The amassed scorch release chakra made even the user begin to sweat, made her own hand begin to dry out. This isn't good. Kakashi had seen the technique before, just like he had seen her scorch release. False darkness, so rushed through his next hand seals. He finished in the blink of an eye, 3 clones made of lightning erupted forward from him as he threw a single kunai forward and followed after it in a dash. She's going to use that technique, it looks like. She'll turn this place into hell with it if she can pull it off, but Anko's a goner if I can't do anything for her. His eye shifted to Anko's soon-to-be corpse. His eye moved to the thousands still in the stadium. He only had enough time for one choice. I'm sorry, Anko. His hands moved through the necessary hand signs, the lightning cutter shone with life as it erupted in not one but both hands. Bolts of electricity ripped free of the back of his 3 clones, connected to each of the concentrated spheres of lightning chakra in his hands with a multitude of bolts. His kunai was melted by the heat of Pakura's chakra. In the blink of an eye the trio of clones launched themselves forward at the speed of lightning. In the blink of an eye Pakura created an aura of scorch release around her body. His clones were destroyed by a barrage of scorch release spheres. In the blink of an eye Kakashi was before her with an identical swirling sphere of chakra in each hand. Rasengan. No horror filled the eyes of Mitogai as he looked upon the village. Homes burned, corpses of friend and foe laid in the street, and the sounds of battle reached him where he stood. Dozens of Suna shinobi laid at his feet, some dead and some simply crippled. He had been lenient with some and unforgiving to others. Some had desired vengeance for the dead they had known as friends, so he had let them survive this encounter. Some had simply attacked the green beast of Konohagakure and paid with their lives. It was the nature of the war they brought to the village he called home after all. Vengeance was a thing that beget vengeance. He would restrain himself as much as he could to prevent such a cycle. Kakashi. His eyes drifted to the stadium where his friend did battle in. Asuma. Kurenai. The two would keep the other safe or die trying. He knew how much they cared for each other and knew they would gladly die for the other. They battled together in the streets. Hokage-sama. Even the Hokage did battle, trapped in a vortex of winds that had to be some barrier ninjutsu from Suna. The Taijutsu master sighed before he leaped from the rooftops. Easy pickings. Far, far away from Mitogai a 6-armed man drew back the string of his golden warbow. A golden arrow ripped through the air a moment later. I snatched it out of the air. His eyes narrowed before a second and third arrow attempted to strike him from both sides. He avoided them and caught sight of the string tied to the end of both of them. It wasn't something he needed to touch to know it was something like spider silk. He landed on the rooftop he had been aiming for and broke the arrow in half with hardly a thought. It was a thing supposed to be stronger than steel forged in the hottest of flames. It was nothing when it was put up against the fearsome and legendary strength of the Jonin. This arrow guy let the broken piece of the shaft fall from his hand as he opened it. I've heard about the man who uses them. The legends of a man with 6 arms wielding golden weapons couldn't be ignored by any Jonin after all. Especially when that man was a mercenary who made a living off of long-distance assassinations of shinobi and their clients. From Guy's memories he was one of many mercenaries that simply disappeared several years ago. I see where he disappeared to know. Guy's eyes traced the path the first arrow, unaided by any tool to adjust it, must have flown. His eyes ended their search at a tower. It was one of the many towers the Konohagakure aviary maintained for the countless messenger birds that traveled to and from all villages, big and small. He hasn't changed his tactics. Guy dashed forward and avoided the arrow sent to punch through his chest with almost contemptuous ease. He immediately saw the beginnings of a trap for him. He decided to spring it. He forced himself to ignore the danger signs all around him. The deserted streets, shinobi and civilians alike simply gone, the biggest one. It was almost painful to do so, but he did it nonetheless. He would spring the trap. He pushed himself forward and avoided the next trio of arrows fired at him at once. He avoided the next arrow that came for his eye. He avoided the arrow after that one that came for his shoulder. It was easy to dodge the arrow that aimed for his leg. He continued forward in his dash and wasn't surprised when a figure leaped from the tower he had been heading for. He was mildly surprised when they seemed to run on the air, but he quickly saw the truth. The same strange spider silk was strung between multiple towers. That was what the former mercenary was running on. Ambush. This was meant for him. Whoever was behind the attack had scouted him before the invasion and decided to attack him now. He landed at the base of the tower regardless of its current vacancy and tracked the archer with his eyes. Kitamaru the spider. Guy's voice was more than loud enough to reach the ears of a shinobi. You gave up your life for this invasion. You must be crazy, old man. The 6-armed man called down to him, laughed at him. I crunched the numbers, I'm on the winning side here. This village is going to be nothing but a footnote in history by the time Lord Orochimaru is done with you. So Orochimaru is behind this attack. Guy shook his head as he brought his fist to his palm. I'll be sure to deal with him after I kill you. There would be no mercy for the man in front of him. Too many shinobi of Konohagakure had fallen to him already. Guy would make sure he ended no more lives with his deadly arrows. He would die in the village he sought to destroy. Good luck with that. Kitamaru laughed at him as a new arrow shot down towards him. His fist shattered it. His eyes easily caught the mercenary's shock before it was gone. He has help. Guy leaped onto the aviary tower Kidomaru had vacated upon his approach. He didn't need to look around to know he was about to be attacked. Kidomaru was already running down another line of silk, his back to a jonin-like Guy was either asking to die or he had competent help. The large fist was swung for Guy's head. He ducked under the blow and struck out with his own to the large attacker's chest. Jirobo the mountain. Guy's comment earned a chuckle from the man who hadn't budged from a blow that would kill most other shinobi. Guy avoided the attempt to grab him by jumping into the air. The arrow was easy to use as a launching pad to gain more height from his jump as he drew a kunai to his hand. He dived back down towards the man beneath him when a third attacker made his presence known. He used Jirobo's large back as a springboard to meet Guy in the air. It was easy to dodge the telegraphed kick, but Guy was unprepared when another foot emerged from the extended leg. He was powered off to the side and hit the roof of a building with enough force to break it. He was immediately out through a window and clung to the building using chakra channeled to his feet. The arrow fired at him this time was snatched out of the air. It took only a glance to see there was no string attached to it, so it couldn't be controlled any longer. In less time than it took most to blink, Guy spotted Kidomaru moving to the next spot he had chosen and flung the arrow towards the line of silk he traveled on. Guy didn't get the chance to see if his attack was successful, as Jirobo roared as he ripped up part of the street and threw rocks at him at lethal speeds. Guy took note of the number of improvised projectiles approaching him and crouched before he launched off the side of the building. He used them as stepping stones in the air to close the distance between himself and Jirobo. It was easy to strike the large man in his equally as large stomach and send him hurtling through the air and into a building. Guy dodged the third attacker as he attempted a blow and this time grabbed hold of the arm that emerged from the extended arm. Two-headed Seiken. Guy threw away the former mercenary and his eyes searched for the line of silk he had thrown an arrow towards. He was forced to dodge the returning Jirobo before he could find it. A crater formed in the street from the large man's impact and Guy struck out with a trio of blows. A kick to the side. A blow to the stomach. And a kick underneath the chin. Jirobo was airborne from the Jonin's monster strength. Guy moved to finish him when Seiken was suddenly in front of him. The kick that felt more like three struck him and sent him hurtling back. Guy didn't let the pain show, but his eyes narrowed as the grinning Seiken lowered his foot back to the ground. Jirobo landed on the ground and anger showed on his face as he rose back to his feet. His hands were plunged into the ground and Guy saw him lift a giant boulder above his head with a roar. The attack was only possible no doubt thanks to what had to be a rather strong earth release chakra nature. Guy's accuracy was one of the best in the village, he had taught one of his students to be so precise after all. A trio of kunai with explosive tags struck the boulder and detonated. The three successive explosions succeeded in blowing the rock in half. Jirobo threw the halves forward regardless and the Jonin turned to the side to dodge them. He darted forward a moment later. His rushed blow was dodged by Jirobo, an arrow came descending from above to punch through his neck and Seiken was behind him. Guy noticed all three attacks as well as the fourth. Something was traveling underneath the ground, something large. He simply moved. One moment he was in the middle of a clear pincer attack and the next he was on a nearby rooftop. A golden arrow was easy to knock out of the way with the back of his hand. His eyes traveled across the ground, noted where the ground was disturbed at and he was gone once again. He tracked it back to its source and saw a flash of red hair before a massive creature was in front of him. The large fist tried to crush him, crater the ground and pulverize stone with his body, but it was easy to escape the blow. He followed up with a kick that sent his attacker crashing through more than a handful of buildings. His victory was short-lived as an ally of the creature grabbed him from behind, locking him in a full Nelson at impressive speed to catch the Taijutsu master by surprise. It was obvious this was an attempt to leave him open to a ranged attack and he was right. His eyes were tracking the arrow soaring towards him while it was still several blocks away. The added drill at the tip proved it would be more destructive than the regular arrows. He didn't waste time with attempting to break free any longer. It was easy to take the beast holding him by surprise when he suddenly dropped to the ground. He did his best to get onto all fours before powering himself forward and up into the air. It worked to turn the beast into a shield that took the force of the arrow. He looked the strange beast in the eye before a single punch was all it took to power it away. It struck the red head that was its master and Guy didn't have to worry about the last of the three attacking. He landed on the ground and his eyes roved over the expansive battlefield. He saw none of his opponent, but at the moment such a thing didn't matter. It was clear they were regrouping. He would take the time to analyze the situation he found himself in. Two obvious close-range fighters. One long-range support fighter. One close-range support fighter with three puppets. Against anyone else, they could almost easily overwhelm. Their attacks would eventually succeed if their opponent failed to keep track of them all. I can't take any unnecessary risks fighting a team like this regardless. They could have been testing me during their attacks. I can't hold back against them no matter what. The longer this fight drags on, the less stamina I'll have and the more effective they'll be as a unit. I can't afford to waste too much time here when there's the chance of an out-of-control Jinchuriki. I considered ending the fight with the 8 gates, a technique to break his limits for a short time, but considered better of it. The consequences would leave him out of the fight indefinitely as he recovered from such severe strain. I can't risk it. Better to save it for the Jinchuriki instead of this. Guy, his decision made, jumped to the middle of the street. He would simply draw them out for now. One moved out to confront him. Demon Flute Teiya. Her moniker was another of the many mercenaries that had vanished several years ago. He was no longer surprised to find her and people so similar to her under the same banner. How many more of you has Orochimaru brought to die with him? She spoke no words. She lifted her flute to her lips, and Guy moved. Jirobo intercepted his blow with an earth-laden fist larger than most men. His punch still shattered it and sent the large orange-haired man flying. Seiken attacked from the side, Guy ducking under his punch. He grabbed the arm as he rose and turned the feared mercenary into a projectile to throw towards Teiya before she could play her first notes. He didn't hear the flute break when he slammed into her, but she couldn't play for the moment. He turned and snatched the arrow coming towards him from the air and threw it back a moment later. Kitamaru would be moving to reposition himself since one tower began to crumble from the force of Guy's return throw. He spotted the blur as he raced to his next destination. A trio of kunai flew forward, cut through the spider silk, and forced Kitamaru to jump into the air to avoid certain death. A fourth kunai struck him in the neck only to bounce off a golden covering. I turned in time to stop the twin blows from Jirobo and grabbed hold of the large shinobi by his arms before throwing him away. He dodged the joint attack by Seiken and Teiya, their adept jutsu easy to read to the master of the style. He jumped back in time to avoid Kitamaru's trio of arrows. They buried into the ground next to him, threw up a cloud of dirt. I heard the two fighters break away and retreat down the street. He didn't pursue. He closed his eyes, sight being useless for now, and relied on his sense of hearing, his sense of touch, and even his sense of smell. They're good. He could give credit where credit was due. Not many shinobi could work so well even if they were partners for life. The 4 shinobi that he fought seemed to have developed impressive synchronization in a rather short amount of time. It was something to be impressed about. Especially when mercenaries were the ones that fought together so well. I felt the sudden vibrations in the ground, heard the sound of palms striking the soil, and leapt away. He heard the ground open up like a greedy mouth trying to swallow him. He landed on an already collapsing building and used his arm to block the blow coming from one of Teiya's creatures. It hurt to start the club, but the pain was ignored in favor of snapping it in half. He made use of the severed upper half of the weapon to bat away the creature that was simply a torso charging him. It was surprisingly agile, landing feet first on a building and vanishing from sight for a moment. He ducked under its attempt to kick him and grabbed the creature's leg. He threw it forward and missed the chance to take out the creature in green. Jirobo made his appearance to the battle once more. Guy stepped back to avoid the swings of the broken club, the thrust of the strange claws one wore on its arms with bandages. He nearly blindsided the Taijutsu master before he was able to escape the mountain of a man as he slammed his fists into the ground with a roar. Knowing he was a earth release user was the only reason Guy was remotely ready for the suddenly sprouting blades of earth erupting from the ground around him. He quickly leaped onto the side of one and ascended to the top. One of Teiya's creatures, the one lacking arms, was waiting for him and its head slammed into his stomach. I wasn't blinded by the pain, he was barely stunned as he was powered through one of the sharp pillars of earth. He slammed into the ground with the creature still on top of him before he managed to get his feet under it and power it back the way they had both came. The club-wielding creature reappeared then and stabbed forward with the jagged end of its broken half of its formerly whole club. I knocked it aside with the back of his hand as he rose and powered the creature away and off to the side with a single kick. He didn't drop his guard and was right not to. The last of Teiya's trio of creatures descended from above with its dual weapons, aiming to pierce Guy. He avoided the sharp point at the end of both weapons and grabbed them by the shaft. His grip tightened and the weapons shattered in his grip. He snatched the 2 spikes out of the air and powered them forward into the creature's chest. It was thrown away with a single punch. Teiya's melody continued. I kept up the irregular flow of his chakra to continually disrupt her attempts at any of her, no doubt many audio genjutsu. The trio of creatures were forming back up as she played, joining together to attack him again when he decided to strike first. He dodged the golden arrow that aimed to pierce through his eye, snatched it out of the air. He threw it forward like a spear, the arrow nearly long enough to be won, and watched it pierce through the bandaged creature as it charged forward once more. It dropped with the arrow ripping through the top of its head and out through its back. I grabbed hold of the bleeding creature and threw it into the air with a shout, sending it more than several blocks away. He vanished where he stood in a burst of speed to avoid Jirobo as he descended from above. Seiken threw a hail of shuriken towards him from 3 arms, and Guy drew a kunai to deflect the majority of them all as fast as he could. A second arrow soared forward, punched through the building in front of him when he dodged it and made it crumple. Guy raced up the side of the building directly across of it and ran straight into Taiya and her 3 returned creatures. Guy's foot had hardly touched the rooftop when he was dogpiled by the 3 as Taiya played her flute. Guy rose with a shout, tossing the 3 creatures away as he aimed to take out Taiya. A trio of arrows interrupted him, forced him to leap out of the way. A massive boulder thrown through the air towards him while airborne was difficult to avoid, so he didn't. He landed on it and prepared to leap away when a large hand grabbed hold of him. The grinning form of Jirobo emerged from within the rock as it shattered and threw Guy towards the ground. Seiken kicked him into a nearby shop before all the shinobi put distance between themselves and the building. It erupted when Kitamaru sent an arrow inside, struck the explosive place there during a brief lull in the battle. Guy burst through the smoke and straight into the large arm of the free-clad creature, trapped in a bear hug the moment he was free of the smoke. It'd hardly take him a moment to free himself, but the creature was covered in explosive tags already burning. Guy kicked himself away, avoided the worst of the sudden blast with distance between himself and the creature. It didn't mean he avoided damage. He dropped to the ground before he could right himself, looked down and saw his burned legs. This fight just became more difficult. He rose back to his feet, ignored the pain already trying to consume him. I can't fight after taking damage like that much longer. The weights hidden by his orange leg warmers remained in place, far too durable to be dislodged by a simple explosion. He reached down to them then, undid the clasp keeping them in place. He saw the trio of blurs approaching him. He gladly tossed 2 of them his weights, saw AI and Seiken immediately fold in on themselves before the weight powered them back and down the street. Jirobo's fist met his, and Guy swiftly shifted to grab hold of his fist and began to crush it. Jirobo immediately made an attempt to pull away, but his strength failed him. Guy's hold was far too strong to break. You should all know just how outmatched you are against me. Guy forced Jirobo to his knees, made the large mountain of a man grimace as his arm was forcefully bent back. You should have known better than to join with Orochimaru. I didn't dodge the arrow this time. He pushed Jirobo into it. Damn it. The shinobi went limp in his hold for a moment, his eyes glanced to his destroyed shoulder, where a golden arrow trembled with the force it was fired with. I'm gonna smash you to pieces, you piece of shit. I ignored him. He turned and threw Jirobo into the returning Seiken. Taiya was stopped when he appeared behind her. She struggled for only a moment before she realized the futility of escaping his choke. She began to quickly hum instead, and the world tried to shift on Guy. He was in the process of disrupting his chakra flow, so it failed horrendously quickly. He was in the process of crushing her throat when he saw his impromptu projectile be thrown off by Seiken, where the 2 landed. He threw the already fading former mercenary towards Seiken when he tried to attack him again. Kitamaru's next trio of arrows failed to do anything to the jonin as his eyes traced their path. He threw his own trio of projectiles in turn, one after the other in rapid succession. The 3 struck simultaneously. 3 explosive kunai detonated at once. I saw Kitamaru's burned form fall to the ground. He breathed out, calmed his racing heart and let his body relax if only slightly. Orochimaru's mercenaries were defeated. For now. He had time to leave this fight and lend his power to another fight, to lend his strength to the burning inferno that the will of fire had become, with the fuel of a war so close to the home of such a flame, the home of so many comrades now threatened with. He didn't know he wouldn't be leaving just yet. You damn bastard, Seiken forced his body to rise. You damn leaf bastard, toying with us like this. Wasting my time with this weak shit when you got more power hidden away. I felt the power suddenly erupt around him, consume him in a vortex that made him almost sick. He nearly fell as the roaringness of the power surrounding him consumed his senses. Orochimaru, he corrupted such an energy. How? How could he even learn something like it? Who taught him? Questions raced through Guy's mind just before a horned demon erupted towards him. Segmented black armor covered its entire body, and it let out maniacal laughter as spiked fists drove themselves into Guy's stomach. He was thrown back but swiftly recovered. He held his stomach as his feet punched into the ground, pushed a mound back as he skidded back from the force of the blow. Impressive. Guy charged forward, blitzing the transformed Seiken, and his fist struck the armor, and an armored fist erupted from his chest, struck him away and into a pair of massive maroon arms. He felt as if he was being crushed when whatever held him tightened its hold. Guy broke free with a shout as he turned while airborne and struck out with a kick that was blocked with a forearm. He took in the orange-haired and maroon-skinned figure he knew to be Jirobo before Seiken attacked from behind. He roared, unleashed a wave of pure chakra, and sent Guy reeling as the durable Jirobo stood firm. He crashed into a building and immediately landed on all fours. He sprang back out into battle and clashed with the 2 transformed mercenaries. They matched him blow for blow, Guy unable to break the combined defenses of either Seiken's demonic armor and multiple limbs, or Jirobo's incredible new level of durability and raw strength. He was thrown across the street like a stone skipped across a pond, dragged along the ground until the mound his impact created drew him to a stop. He stumbled as he rose back to his feet and his eyes widened. The golden arrow nearly took his head off if he didn't deflect it with a powerful blow off to the side. His eyes caught sight of the transformed Kitamura next. His skin had turned dark red, his hair had turned gray, and spikes had sprouted from each of his elbows. He was grinning from his nest of webs between two buildings. The great golden war bow rested in two of his arms as a fresh arrow was created from a golden material spewed from his mouth. A third eye on top of his forehead was open and locked into Guy with an unnerving precision. He hardly saw the next arrow. Instinct saved him from certain death. Instincts honed from countless battles screamed at him to dodge, to jump away, and he did. Slightly off, the arrow demolished the store off to the right. Its fall unleashed a cloud of dust that blanketed the street. Guy breathed slightly easier with the concealment before he heard the sounds of a flute. His disrupted chakra didn't save him this time, the sound was never designed to trap him this time. It was as if a sonic blast struck him. It was probably the truth as he was sent hurtling back through the street. He was saved from deafness only because he had quickly clamped his chakra laden hands over his ears, improvised earplugs from his days on the battlefield. He slammed into another building and groaned as he rose, feeling as if his insides were liquefied. His heart was beating faster and faster, his vision began to narrow, and he breathed in and out faster and faster. This isn't good. Guy watched as his two opponents approached, another prepared another shot from his destructive bow, and another was hidden from his sight. Three shadows appearing above him showed that the monsters Taiya had made use of were returned, and their presence screamed of the same corrupted energy as the others. Whatever Orochimaru's done to them, I can't fight them like this anymore. I may even have to use some of my ninjutsu to win this. Almost as quickly as the thought came to his mind, it was discarded as fire entered the eyes of Konoha's green beast. No. I swore to my student to use only taijutsu to accomplish any task, to overcome any challenge, and to emerge victorious from any battle. If I was to break that promise, I would no longer have the honor of being his teacher. His foes approached, their dark power enshrouded them, and they clearly thought they had him defeated at last. The past few moments had made them believe themselves superior to the strength of the green beast. They had pushed him on the back foot and thought he was at his limit. He was far from them. I didn't want to have to use this, but it seems all my other options have been eliminated after all. Guy would have sighed if he could have wasted the air. It was more important to conserve all he could for what he would be doing. He at last spotted Taiya as she dropped down onto the street beneath Kitamura, her head wrapped by white horns that formed a crown, her hair had grown much longer, and her skin had turned light brown. Yes. With all of them transformed, using this corrupted senjutsu, I don't have a choice at all. It's come to that. There was nothing else to be done but one thing, and that was to unleash the power of his greatest technique. I wish it didn't have to come to this. He crossed his arms in front of him, exhaled until his lungs were empty of air. I can sense the chakra building up in the stadium, I can tell what Orochimaru's real plan is at last, and I can't let this drag on any longer. When the life of my comrades is on the line, when the ever-burning flame of this village is threatened, and when a threat as great as the Jinchuriki is here, I have no other choice. He breathed in. He breathed out. The 8 inner gates. Everything stilled for a moment. Pakura's eyes were wide open in shock. Kakashi's was narrowed with focus. The spiraling sphere of chakra, the near-legendary A-rank jutsu made famous by its creator the fourth Hokage, in both his hands as he drove them towards the Sungakure shinobi. Pakura's scorch-release covered body made an attempt to stop the attack, destroy it with the power of such focused heat, but there was nothing to be done. Nothingness consumed the two in that moment. The scorch-release armor held firm against the force of the Rasengan. The second Rasengan was too much for the armor. Pakura's eyes then widened in horror. Kakashi's single visible eye widened in pain. His gloves were incinerated by the heat. The bandages Pakura wore around her waist were shredded by the force of the Rasengan. Kakashi pushed forward, the diminished Rasengan in his left hand and the more powerful Rasengan in his right hand. Pakura felt her skin begin to shred. Kakashi felt his hands burn, the skin there blister and burst. The Konohagakure shinobi took a single step forward, drove his Rasengan forward. Pakura was forced back. Her scorch-release armor finally ruptured. The scorch-release chakra in her hand, rendered unstable when she lost her focus from the pain, followed suit. Pakura threw her hand forward, found a new target for what was left. The massive blast consumed her. The Rasengan finally powered Pakura away with their remaining might. Kakashi was thrown back, the blast not outright lethal, but still far from weak. Even with Pakura's depleted reserves it was powerful. Stillness engulfed their battlefield for several long moments. The broken body shifted where it laid a moment later. Hate grew and made the broken body thrash to free itself. It was broken by the voice of the kunoichi before she coughed up blood after the devastating technique sent her through the air, crashing through wall after wall as she was powered back and into the shell of tunnels and rooms behind the seating area. Her face contorted in agony when she moved, one of her hands coming to touch at the raw and shredded skin. The aura of her scorch release chakra was gone, focused on her hand, and she grit her teeth to keep herself from screaming at what she had to do. She was forced to cauterize the worst of the wound with her remaining chakra, her scorch release, swiftly breaking down to simple fire release chakra that broke down further until it was nothing but a dull blue haze around her hand. Her limited medical knowledge was used next, doing her best to repair the worst of the damage done to her by the attack. She forced herself to remain calm, count the seconds between inhaling and exhaling. She forced her panic away from the surface of her mind, beat it down, so she could focus on healing herself. If I didn't have my scorch release armor I would be dead right now. She couldn't help but remember the clash of her chakra against the might of two of the fourth's legendary Rasengan. Most of the force behind both of them was wasted breaking through it. If I hadn't activated it in preparation she didn't want to think about what would have happened. She was already close to death despite her quick actions to heal herself, and if she had actually taken both orbs of rotating chakra without her armor, she wouldn't have to deal with the pain she was in now. This isn't over. She could rise, the damage from the twin use of the Rasengan was more than enough to defeat other shinobi, but she refused to be like other shinobi. I can't lose to him. She only had one chance to end him. It was her only chance to finally finish what she had started during the Third Shinobi World War. Her chakra was put to use, chakra threads connecting to her arms and legs. She forced herself to move, force her broken body to jerk itself into the air. Her face twisted with the pain every movement brought her, the damage she was doing to what was already broken impossible to know. How the hell did she get so much stronger? Kakashi collapsed to his knees across from her, his flak jacket was mostly destroyed by the explosive results of Pakura's scorch release armor being broken. He was lucky he still had some of the tattered shreds of his shirt still covering his chest, the fishnet armor he wore beneath it all revealed. His mask was also still somehow in place, ripped and torn, but still covering the majority of the lower half of his face. They were near equals during their encounters during the Third Shinobi World War, before the alliance between Konohagakure and Sunagakure. They had clashed enough times that he knew the ins and outs of her scorch release techniques, and she knew more than a fair share of his tactics, from his clones all the way to his taijutsu. He had learned to counter her, she learned to counter him. Their last clash during the war had left them both nearly dead. Have I gotten that weak? The thought, even the mere idea of it, made him wince. Not from pain, from shame. He could already see her forcing herself to move, her body jerking with unnatural stiffness and fluidity. She was both limp and stiff, her body seemingly confused on how to act after the beating it had taken from his twin Rasengan. She was using Sunagakure's technique no doubt, forcing her broken body up and keeping up the technique through sheer will. He briefly opened his covered eye and saw the blue strands of chakra that forced her body to move, the source behind each erratic step forward. She's unbelievable. Kakashi couldn't bring himself to move his burned and exhausted body. Even now, each of his breaths was a ragged thing. He could hardly fight down the urge to vocalize his pain, scream as his burned skin split and cracked, as his scorched hands involuntarily moved, no matter how much he desired them to be still, and the bones he had no doubt broken when he had clashed his Rasengan to Pakura's formidable defense. It didn't help she had decided to forsake her attack in the end and simply strike him with it on top of all of it. How can she even stand after I hit her with two Rasengan? Kakashi tried to rise back to his feet, he gave an honest attempt and nearly collapsed to the ground for his efforts. His body, broken by the explosive climax of the battle between himself and Pakura, did not want to do anything but fall. It was too much of a struggle than he would like to admit to stay on his knees. And if she can get up, why can't I do the same? He made another attempt, pushed himself to ignore the pain, ignore whatever limits were in place like a certain jonin he knew, and forced himself to put one foot under himself. He panted for breath even as Pakura once again stepped into the seating arena. Her body struck a seat, but she ignored it as she jerked herself to the side, her unnatural steps carrying her forward as the dried-out corpse sitting in it fell to the ground at her feet. Her eyes were only for Kakashi, seeing his attempts to rise, and scorch release chakra took hold of her hands. Kakashi knew what was coming. He refused to die without putting up a fight. His broken arm moved, threw a kunai hidden up the shredded remains of his sleeves towards the kunoichi. She didn't bother trying to dodge it. Her body twisted in a way that was definitely unnatural, was no doubt painful, despite how flexible she no doubt was, and the kunai struck her in the arm. She hardly seemed to show pain, her fingers twitching to send her forward once more. Pakura growled his name as she forced her body forward. Her eyes didn't leave him even as the meager amounts of chakra around her hands broke down, her focus shifted only to maintaining the chakra threads that were the only reason she was moving to finish the fight. Haddock. Kakashi's abrupt movement, what may even become his last act, had made his body refuse any future command from him. He was lucky he could remain upright and not collapse. His broken arm made him wince, but he did his best to ignore it, focus on the battle he still had to win. His eye drifted to Enko. Enko? He needed to save her. He still had at least some time. At least he hoped he still had time. Haddock Bakura's puppet-like steps brought her closer and closer towards him, ignoring the pain she no doubt felt with the determination to kill the jonin in front of her. One hand briefly went limp at her side before the chakra threads took hold once more. The fingers were made into a sloppy fist, bound there with a thread wrapping around her fist. Her blow was as telegraphed as it could be as her arm bent at the elbow and lifted awkwardly into the air at her shoulder. Spars with Guy let him know exactly where she was going to punch him as her fist flew forward. His broken body didn't move to let him avoid the attack. He struck the ground, feeling blood in his mouth from Bakura's blow to his face. He forced himself to rise on his elbows, tried to force himself to get up to his feet, but it was useless. The back of Bakura's extended fist struck him on the side of the face as she ripped it through the air, made the world shift as he was forced onto his back. "You can't even get up, can you?" Her voice was hardly above a whisper, pain and exhaustion showing itself at last. When the world came back he saw that Bakura was above him, the indifference the two had somehow maintained throughout the fight gone from her eyes. She was angry at him. She wanted to hurt him. Pain filled her eyes as much as any anger. Pain and resolve to finish the mission. Blood dyed his mask red as he coughed. He attempted to sit up, glare at her, but she knocked him back down to the ground with a stiff arm, her chakra threads, forcing her body to nearly fold in half to accomplish such a thing. "Where's that fight you once had, Kakashi?" Bakura almost fell even as she spoke, forcing herself to regain her balance as her body jerked upright thanks to her chakra threads. Her eyes locked with his soul eye and he knew she hated everything about him in that moment. It was clear even for him to see. "Where's that boy from the battlefield?" "He left it." Kakashi was surprised he could still talk, surprised he wasn't dead yet. "You should have too. No one leaves a hell like that. No one." Her hand shot out like a viper and she grabbed hold of him by the remains of his flak jacket, pulling him off the ground at least partially. A pair of chakra threads wrapped around him was the only reason he was still up and not on the ground again after the kunoichi's grip failed her. Her fist was drawn back. He knew exactly where it was going to land. Her blow sent his head to the side and more blood stained his mask. Her hand was jerked back into position, Kakashi struggled to turn his head enough to look at her. This almost fits." Kakashi hardly felt Bakura's next strike, his exhausted body was beginning to go numb. He could hardly feel anything as his eyes nearly drifted close. The dull shock of the pain was the only thing that brought him back from the brink of unconsciousness. "A shinobi like me." Bakura's blows would have normally hurt, but they were nothing now, he hardly felt the warmth of the blood filling his mouth. He could hardly feel any of the blows, but his body still reacted, still felt pain, and the training of a shinobi kept him from falling completely unconscious. "Someone like me deserves to die like this." Bakura couldn't actually keep him up anymore, his already destroyed flak jacket tearing itself apart even more at the stress and letting him fall back onto his back. The Sunagakur shinobi hardly seemed to be impeded, not allowing anything to stop her, it seemed as her fist descended on Kakashi once more. She nearly fell with her target, her own body nearly just as exhausted as Kakashi's own. "I should have seen this coming, should have known that this would happen." He didn't know how the pain kept bringing him back, the pain he couldn't even feel anymore. "I should have known I couldn't beat her, I couldn't beat her when I was at my best, I can't beat her now, I couldn't beat anyone like her now. Do you want to know why I'm going to kill you, Kakashi?" Bakura's voice was still hardly more than a whisper as she drew her fist back, grabbed hold of Kakashi by what remained of his flak jacket on his shoulder to hoist him up with a shaking grip. He could look into her eyes, see past the pain filling them, see the hate shining in them instead. "Do you?" She shook his broken body, tried to force him to do something beyond just sit there mute. He had stopped making any sound, lying limp as she beat the life out of him. "Answer me already, Kakashi. Answer me, you bastard." She shook him harder, Kakashi looking at her but didn't see her. He saw too many faces, too many eyes with the same hatred. He saw her but didn't see her. Another time. Another place. Blood. Smoke. Screams. Scorched air. It was hot, too hot. The world was burning beneath them, the sky was crackling above. There was so much death. Too much death. And still they fought. "You think you can win, beat a village as great as Sunagakur?" They clashed, ignoring the dead around them, ignoring everything but the other. "A village like yours isn't worth anything." Both were too similar, too smart for their own good. His sharingan let him read her movements, and her mind was racing fast enough to counter his counters to her movements. Neither would win at this rate. Taijutsu wouldn't get them anywhere, wouldn't let them finish this fight. They both knew it, couldn't deny the skills of the other. But it was all they had left. It didn't matter if it wouldn't work, if they would never kill the other. All that mattered was to finish the fight. All they could do was keep trying to kill each other before the other could kill them. "Look at me, Kakashi." Pakura's sudden shout wrenched him back, forced him to look her in the face as she drew her fist back. Scorch release chakra ignited around her fist, the last blow imminent. "Look at me so you can die with an ounce of dignity." Like it matters, Kakashi finally spoke, his voice almost unrecognizable to him. It was more empty than it had ever been, not even war, not the loss of everything, and everyone he loved time and time again, could do the same to him. "I thought you were smart, Pakura." He didn't care anymore. It was impossible to care. "If you really do destroy this village, if you really can kill everyone here, it won't change anything." Kakashi didn't know why he was talking. He just knew he wanted to continue. "The same thing, the same exact thing you're doing to us now will happen to your village. And the next village after that. And the next village. It never stops. That's why you can't let something like this cloud your mind, Kakashi. Vengeance, it just creates an endless cycle. One person takes vengeance on another person takes vengeance on another person take vengeance on them. It just keeps happening. We as shinobi let this horrible cycle continue. We let it consume us, let it cloud our minds, and we let hate spread everywhere we go. We feel pain and we do nothing but spread that pain to others. It's a damn shame to see the same thing that happened to my generation keep happening in the next. I don't know who was behind the attack on Konoha, but I can make a good guess that this is the work of that vicious cycle. Everyone feels wronged by the world, feels as if the world owes them something, and when they don't get what they want, they let hatred consume them. They let that hatred consume them until they can do nothing but act on it. With that hatred, they make terrible things happen. They make the world an even worse place, they make other people feel wronged, they make other people be filled by hate at the world. Those people then let that hate out and endlessly spread it. The world is consumed by endless hate and endless hate fuels vengeance. You feel that hatred now. I know you do. I lost my student, the man I thought would change the world for the better, to this cycle, and I know your pain. I feel hate too, Kakashi. I feel nothing but hatred towards the man behind the attack. I want to do nothing but take revenge, go to where he would call home and destroy it. I want to go out and find all those he cares for and take them from him just like he took so many I knew from the village. I buried too many friends to do anything but want to kill the man behind the attack. I want to take revenge, but I also know what it'll cause. That man, the man who caused this attack, he is only another iteration of the same cycle of hatred that's been sending this world into conflict after conflict, making men, women, and children fight war after war and be responsible for death after death. If all we do is spread this cycle, if all we do is know how to hate the people who have wronged us, then we can never escape it. We'll always be cursed to live this cycle, to see our friends live this cycle, to see our family live this cycle, and to see generation after generation throw their lives away thanks to it. Because of that cycle, because we've let it consume us all so much, the world is in a horrible place. Iwa hates Konoha. Konoha hates Iwa. Suna hates Kiri. Kiri hates Kumo. Kumo hates Suna. Kiri hates Iwa. Iwa hates Kumo. We're all simply trapped in a cycle, and it never ends because we can't see past it, can't see past the blinding hate we all let fester inside us day after day. We're not a world ruled by Kage Kakashi, we're a world ruled by hate. We let hate rule us more than any rules of any village. Just look at what's been done in Kurigakure because of hate. People die more and more there because the cycle of hatred we've all lived with is driving them to madness at last. I've heard stories of parents killing their own children and then turning on each other, all out of hatred. If we're not careful, we'll end up the same. Do you understand me? Can you understand anything I'm saying, Kakashi? If you let this hatred you feel now consume you like everyone else in this world does, if you let that festering hate we all have inside us out, you'll become another piece in that vile machine, Kakashi. Don't be another part of the cycle of hatred. Be a part of something that you can be proud to give to the future generations, work towards something that is harder to work at than hatred ever will be. Be a part of something that makes this world a better place. Be part of peace instead of hatred, Kakashi. How it took nearly dying to figure it out in the end. Kakashi would have smiled if his body could do anything like it at this point. I thought you were crazy that day, Jiraiya, just some crazy old hermit having finally lost his mind, but you were right. You've been right this entire time. I can see the smoke, I can hear the sounds of battle, hear the screams of hate even so far away. Every shinobi down there is fighting with hated. Everyone down there is just another part of the cycle of hatred. All we do is hate. We're all trapped in an endless cycle. Pakura, Yumi, even the Cage, everyone who carries the name shinobi is a part of the same cycle. He almost wanted to laugh. He didn't. His humor wasn't that black. We're all trapped. Sakura didn't respond with words. Her eyes told him all he needed to know, let him know she felt nothing but hate for him in that moment. She wanted to do nothing but kill him and she would. Chakra flickered around her hand, her legs suddenly trembling, her grip was already slipping. It truly was just sheer will keeping her on her feet now. Shakuten. Kajusatsu. She poured nearly all her remaining chakra into her last attack. Despite it all, despite the pain she was in, the broken state of her body after enduring Kakashi's last desperate attack, a mad smile spread across her face. This is it. She couldn't help but smile despite her pain, her exhaustion. The success of her mission was so close at hand. This was the end for Kakashi Haddock. The copy nin would be dead by her hands. Kakashi knew it was over. He let his eye close, felt the approach of the blistering heat, and let out what he knew to be his last breath. This is the end of failure deserves. No one who called themselves shinobi was a stranger to pain. All of them knew pain and knew how to handle it. Even so, Sakura couldn't stop her scream as she slammed into the ground. She had limits, however great they may be, of what she could take. Her body was too broken now to even consider rising. She didn't know if it was from the pain or the sheer frustration, but she screamed. Kakashi Haddock still lived. She could no longer fight, could hardly move. She doubted she could even twitch her fingers without suffering absolute agony. And now a monster stood in front of you. Damn you. Sakura looked to where the last of her scorch release chakra left her hand, nearly the last of her chakra at this point after the taxing first aid she performed on herself. What the hell are you? The gray-skinned beast only growled at her. It was on all fours above Kakashi, clearly shielding the downed shinobi with not only its form, but the strange and large webbed hands that emerged from its back. Sakura wanted to kill it, but her chakra was too little to make use of any techniques. Even staying awake now was proving almost too difficult. She felt her consciousness waver, barely managed to maintain it, and she groaned where she laid on the ground. It was impossible to deny the facts in front of her now. She was defeated. What is that thing even? A critical eye ran over the beast in front of her. If she could get out of this, escape this place, she needed to know what the creature in front of her was. Haddock summons hounds. Could it be some mutated mutt? No. He doesn't have the strength to do anything like that. He would have done so a long time ago if he could. There's no other Konoha shinobi worth knowing about here. There's nothing in our records about a summon like that anyway. The beast growled at her and Sakura's eyes widened. It was preparing to attack. Dark chakra flared around it, consumed it until the only thing Sakura could see were the beast's glowing yellow eyes, surrounded by dark hate-filled abysses. It's going to kill me. Sakura tried to move, to dodge the beast, but her body fiercely protested the very idea of movement. My body won't move anymore. I don't have the chakra to create any more threads. I'm nothing but a free target to that thing now. Sakura tried to force herself to move, force her legs to obey her, force her arms to do as she commanded, but it was all worthless. Her body was too broken, too exhausted, to move any longer. She was going to die. The beast was going to aim to kill, its claws would soon be covered by her blood after it tore her apart. She couldn't escape her fate now. She was doomed. The beast's body tensed before it simply vanished from sight. Sakura closed her eyes, steeled herself to die with at least some dignity. She would not whimper in fear, try to beg for a non-existent aversion from her fate. She would die a proud Sunagaker Kunoichi and nothing else. She had done what she could to accomplish her duty, had at least wounded Kakashi and taken him out of the fight. He would die of his injuries just like she would die now. The invasion would succeed. The Hidden Leaf village would be crushed by the might of the hidden sand, destroyed through the unmatched brilliance of the fourth Kazekage. She could die almost happy with those thoughts. You foolish girl. Her salvation from death came with agony. Her body was violently pulled away from the stone she rested on, avoided death, but pain made her vision go white. She almost screamed but withheld herself, stopped herself from thrashing, from sobbing at the absolute pain her body endured. Shichiyo-sama, a pair of chakra threads hung her in the air, attached to her back, and made her sag forward. Pain was everything to her, consumed her in an abyss she couldn't escape any longer. She nearly welcomed it. The abyss would lead her to darkness, away from the eyes of the elder before her. Hush girl. Chiyo drew her closer, let her hang in front of her for now. Disappointment was a dim flame in her eyes. You've failed your mission and can hardly stand by yourself. It's almost sad to see you brought so low. Haddock will not trouble our forces. He can no longer fight. Sakura bit down her anger at Chiyo's biting words. She knew the old woman in front of her would have failed to even match someone of Kakashi's caliber. She was simply jealous of her power. Jealous of the power she could so easily call forth, the power to reshape the very battlefield. I should leave you here, but Rasa-san has too much of a soft spot for you. Chiyo's words did finally bring a snarl from Sakura. The little chakra she had left was enough to raise the temperature around the two to just uncomfortable levels. It could do little else and Chiyo knew. US. Her words were lost as she pulled back, threw Pakura behind her. The monster had seemingly stopped waiting and attacked them both. The ground Chiyo stood on erupted into a cloud of dust, stone pulverized in a single blow it seemed from the creature. You should stop taunting Pakura-kun so much, sister. Ibizo ran a cloth over the old blade in his hand before sealing it away. You nearly lost your life. This creature is the girl who was Orochimaru's student, isn't it? Chiyo unsealed a large hulking puppet from a seal, 4 arms in total with large bulky fists that it brought together with an audible thud. She must have awakened that power because she was dying. How pathetic. The puppet lunged forward just as the monster tensed. The 2 massive fists on its left side crashed into the ground, the monster already gone in the blink of an eye. Chiyo's eyes searched for the transformed Kunoichi and swiftly pulled the puppet back while it was joined by another much more slender one. Blades tore through the ragged black cloak that covered its smaller form, scythes from its backs, slender blades erupting from its chest, as if opening an artificial maw, rows of jagged blades spreading down each of its arms, and even its head was given a head of jagged spikes, blades hanging on wires, as if they were hair. The trio of cables tipped in barbed hooks emerged down the wrists of the larger puppet and both threw themselves forward at a twitch of Chiyo's fingers. The beast didn't get far before a large fist struck her in the back, cratered the ground with a vicious impact. The second machine threw itself forward in a roll, scythes aiming to cleave through her as it spun. The beast was gone in the blink of an eye instead. The attack failed. A large fist sailed forward on a cable, Senbon followed after it in a small storm. The smaller puppet took to the air in a blur of movement, swung down as the wooden fingers broke apart, razor-sharp wire cascading down as its arms began to rotate. A deadly twister of wires descended on the beast as it reappeared on the ground. It didn't stay still for long. The large webbed hands emerging from its back swung out, threw it into the air to the surprise of all those watching. A clawed hand grabbed hold of the puppet. No, the beast was too raw of mind to grab the puppet. Its hands ripped into the chest, tore it in half with a bestial roar. It threw the split halves to the ground as the large puppet was drawn before Chiyo. Caution came to her eyes. Caution at exactly what she was fighting. It was no longer like the shinobi she had fought before. It was nothing like any shinobi she had fought before. It had become something else entirely. A true monster. Fear gripped hold of her heart, an ice-cold shard that pushed its way into her heart, spread through her veins. Terror. It was terror consuming her. How impressive. It was just as swiftly forced away. She was not one to let terror control her, to force her to surrender her body to it. She focused on what needed to be done and only it. She needed to kill the beast before her. And it needed to be done now. Her fingers twitched, drew the bulky puppet to surge forward as its cloak tore open. The large open cavity that was its chest was revealed as its 2 lower arms were thrown forward, extended by a hidden mechanism. The large hands interlocked and the cavity split open at a seam, open like a giant maw. Blades began to move, saws began to spin, and chakra flowed to a seal located at its core. The arms opened on the side, too many lines of chakra to count forming a razor-sharp net. The beast was trapped within as a powerful suction began. Its webbed hands functioned as wings as they flapped, forced it into the air as it battled the powerful suction coming from the puppet before it. The beast snarled, roared, and the shockwave such action released nearly threw Chiyo off her feet. She was lucky she could anchor herself with the puppet and her chakra threads. Speaking of the puppet, it dropped to the ground, its talon-like feet digging into the cracked stone beneath it to anchor it in place. From each of its shoulder came a trio of darts and cables, latching onto the ground around it as the seal burned bright with chakra as the suction increased. The beast still stayed in the air, battled against the suction with a mad frenzy that had Chiyo concerned. There was a limit to the suction mechanism she didn't expect to have to account for. It took a fair amount of chakra to power even with the efficient seal on the puppet. It would be difficult to maintain if the creature continued to battle her. You could lend a hand any time now, Ibizo. She didn't turn to see where her brother was. He was assuredly standing nearby merely observing her progress. Now is not the time to be lazy. I was just checking on Pakura-kun, Chiyo. His humored voice did not fit the grim expression crossing his face. I see Orochimaru's cursed seal is quite powerful. Just help me kill her. The net of chakra burned dimmer as Chiyo staggered where she stood. I don't need to head you, compliment the boy. Ibizo spoke no more. His sword was raised as he vanished from sight. He appeared silently on the extended arms of the puppet, his chakra racing down the blade as he focused on his target. A single swing unleashed a crescent of chakra as thin as a lock of hair. It soared silently through the air, through the vacuum the creature battled against with its bastardized wings, and struck true. His eyes widened when the creature hardly bled from the attack that should have sliced through its dark gray neck, decapitated the monster. He recovered in time to see the creature turn its black and yellow eyes to him, snarl at him, and then scream. Ibizo. Chiyo didn't hold back her shout as she saw what looked like a wave of chakra and sound strike her brother. Blood didn't sprout from any wound as the elderly shinobi slammed into the ground far away from her. He only came to a stop when he struck the railing. So close to the raging sands hiding the Jinchuriki. The sands that were ravenous, thirsted for fresh blood always. Chiyo ignored the fact that distance from the puppet weakened the technique. It was already failing as she moved away and to her brother. The puppet released its anchors, the cables disconnecting and the feet left behind, and surged forward as a second seal activated. It propelled it forward with a burst of wind from its back. It slammed into the beast as its extended arms retracted. It grabbed hold of it in a four-armed bear hug, dragged the beast into the countless roaring blades within it. The beast roared as its response. It webbed claws wrapped around the puppet, talons at the end ripping into the puppet. The beast's chest rose as it breathed in. Chiyo was nearly deafened by the creature's next use of what had to be a weaponized scream. It destroyed the puppet, obliterated it into splinters and chunks of wood. It flapped its wings, sent the wood that clung to the talons at the end of what should be fingers away, and suddenly dropped to the ground. Chiyo used her free hand to grab hold of Ibizo's no doubt broken form, bring him to her with as much gentleness she could with such haste. The creature growled behind her. She heard it breath in, prepare its next scream. Cables wrapped around her neck made the beast thrash when electricity suddenly rushed through its body. Chiyo ignored the few members of the puppet brigade she brought with her as she pulled Ibizo away. Keep it restrained. She barked out a single order to those responsible, saw them already struggling as their puppets anchored themselves into the ground, not unlike hers had did, talon-like feet, and a number of wires with hooks at the end gripping the ground. She saw two already healing pakura. The kunoichi had fallen unconscious at last it seemed, unable to remain awake for the entire duration of her clash with the beast. Chiyo considered her lucky. She wouldn't have to deal with the rest of the invasion. The shinobi was interrupted by the beast before them all. The roar ripped free of the beast that they thought finally restrained. The webbed hands at its back were wreathed in dark chakra, something so vile it made some sick, made their concentration waver. Cords that had been pulled taut suddenly grew slack, and the beast showed its appreciation for its freedom. It tore the limp puppets forward, shattered them with the bodies of the others. A number of scrolls were drawn, new mechanical warriors released, but it was too late. The creature's webbed hand swung down, talons embedded in the stone ground beneath it, let its vile power run free. The dark chakra that had previously wreathed its wings erupted from the ground. Fall back. Chiyo leaped away, dragged Ibizo with her, and those that could followed after her. One was not fast enough. The wave of dark chakra consumed him, made him scream as he was torn to the ground. Chiyo could only stare as the shinobi died in front of her, snakes of the same vile chakra ripping free of his body. They shot across the ground, vanished into whatever the third stage's proctor had become thanks to Orochimaru and his experimentation with power few could understand, power even fewer could make use of, and even fewer ever mastered. This girl the beast looked to her, stared at her with yellow eyes that held no shred of humanity anymore. It growled but did not pursue. It let them go. It had what it wanted. Such a thing left a sour taste in Chiyo's mouth. She was a veteran of war, a woman renowned for her skills with poison and puppetry, and put them to deadly effect, and was one of the greatest shinobi Sunagaker could call upon for any tasks be it diplomatic or military. She had decades of experience on the girl that silently watched her flee. She was leagues above her in terms of power, in terms of experience, in terms of raw intelligence. She should be the one silently watching the girl free, run from her while she decided to spare her. It should not be the opposite. She should not be the one forced to flee from a battle. It was ludicrous to think that she had to run, had no choice, but to flee from a superior foe. It made no sense why she had to be the one to run from a girl who should be dead. The beast silently watched her leave. Chiyo swore to make it pay. The beast growled before it turned away from the fleeing shinobi, turned to where Kakashi still laid on the ground. He had fallen unconscious just like Bakura, left the conscious world for an unconscious one without pain. Next to him stood Ibiki Marino. "Anko, can you hear me?" The beast didn't lunge towards the scarred man. It did nothing but stare at him. He took it as a good sign to stay where he was. He figured if she didn't want him here he would already be dead. He had seen how she had handled Chiyo. Raw power overcame experience, and whatever Anko has become she had plenty of power, enough to make Ibiki worry for her. Power like it, chakra that felt so dark, didn't come without some kind of price. "I need you to listen, Anko." She didn't come to him, didn't move from where she still stood. He figured he was still in the clear. She wasn't showing any outright hostility. "Can you do that for me?" He received no answer. She didn't nod her head or grunt. She continued to just stand and stare at him. "Anko." His voice was slightly more forceful. Only slightly. He didn't flinch when the transformed kunoichi was suddenly in front of him. He stared into yellow eyes and waited. Her fingers tensed, curled, and then settled at her side. Her eyes roved his face, searched for something. She didn't find it. Her head tilted to one side. Her long blue hair flowed over one shoulder, settled there after a moment of action from the sudden motion as she silently watched him. His body was completely still. Fear was absent from his eyes. He was trained to handle these types of situations, trained to show nothing but what he wanted to anyone unfortunate enough to be interrogated by him. He counted her breaths. She wasn't preparing a scream. He counted it as a win, another small victory for him. He was fine with small victories over large ones. Small victories added up rather quickly. Large victories faded away in the end, weren't worth the cost sometimes. Small victories were calculated, large victories were often too spontaneous, too random. Interrogations were won by a series of small victories, a dozen small victories in a small room. Enko. His voice lost the added force. She did nothing but stare at him, wait for a reason to act again. Can you hear me? He didn't get a verbal response. The clawed hand settled on his chest. His body didn't tense, didn't flinch at the suddenly contact. He had read it already. He was ready for it. She was curious about him. That was better than the alternative. Outright hostility would leave him dead. Her fingers ran off to the side, away from his steadily beating heart, grabbed hold of the edge of his coat. She tugged on it. He waited. She tugged on it again. He leaned forward slightly, let her pull on it again. It was clear now. He moved back slowly. She pulled slowly. His arm slid out the far sleeve, let it fall off the other. The clawed wings withdrew into her back, vanished from sight as if they were never there at all. Enko smiled as she put the coat on. Back with us I see. Ibiki watched as she adjusted the coat, covered her exposed chest with it by closing it up to her bust. He received only a look from the still transformed kunoichi. He raised an eyebrow. She pointed to her throat. He nodded. Hurt? Yes. He nodded. Move. Yes. Their brief talk done, he bent down and grabbed hold of Kakashi. The clawed hand settled over his wrist. He didn't panic. Anko loosened her grip before she broke his wrist. He pulled his hand back. She picked up Kakashi. Can you change back? It was time for yes and no questions. Her arms being occupied meant she couldn't sign anymore. She focused for a moment, he felt the chakra suddenly surge around her. It was gone just as suddenly as it arrived. She shook her head a moment later, a frown making the corner of her darker lip sink. I was afraid of that. He didn't need an answer as he walked beside her. After this is over, keep out of sight. Jiraiya-sama will know what to do about this most likely. She nodded. The two proceeded forward. I hope he does. Ibiki glanced to the once black and dormant seal burning with a purple light on Anko's neck. I don't know anyone else who can fix that seal. And that marks the end of the 6th part of the story. If you guys made it this far and want more contents like this, comment down below to let me know. Thanks for sticking out till the end. I would gladly appreciate every likes, comments and subscribes I could get on this series. It only takes a minute and best of all, you can show your support for absolutely no cost. See you in the next one.